I'm going on a trip to Yellowstone at the end of May of 2023, and I'm deciding what lenses I want to bring along. I don't have the budget for big fast prime lenses, but I do already have a few long lenses in my arsenal. I'll absolutely be taking along my Canon RF 100-500 lens, as it's spectacular and quick. But I know there will be times when subjects might be further away than 500mm will capture to fill the frame, even on a crop sensor camera, like the Canon EOS R7. And even though I have two Canon EOS R5 cameras at my disposal, I will only be taking the R7 body. So I thought this might be a good time to do a compare of these two lenses with teleconverters, and also without. I have the Canon RF 1.4 and Canon RF 2x teleconverters. I mostly use my 800mm lens for lunar photography, and I've found it works best with the RF 1.4x teleconverter. I've used the 2x teleconverter on this lens in the past and the results were stunningly soft, and the fixed aperture becomes f/22 with a 2x teleconverter, so I don't even bother with that combination anymore. In my past testing, the 1.4x teleconverter is far sharper and has a much more manageable aperture. To match the length of the 800mm lens with a 1.4x teleconverter, I'm mounting the 2x teleconverter to the RF 100-500 lens. And then for good measure I'm removing the teleconverters from both lenses and snapping sample photos that way also. My subject will be a street sign that is approximately 60 feet from the tripod. I ran the raw files through DxO Pure Raw version 3, because that's how I intend to process my Yellowstone images after the trip concludes. I also applied my typical Lightroom presets to these images, for the same reason. May as well get a glimpse of what I would be expecting from my trip images. I'm going through these files and zooming in to 100% to see the quality of all the images. First up is the RF 100-500 lens with no teleconverter. In all of these images, the shutter is set to 1/1000th and the ISO is set to 1600. Only the aperture value will change with all the images. The quality of the image is pretty good, even with no teleconverters, and this has been my past experience with this lens while shooting wildlife with this camera. Next up is the RF 800mm lens, with no teleconverter. Sharpness of this lens has always been surprisingly good, especially for a lens that costs less than $1,000. But there are severe drawbacks to this lens. With no teleconverter, your fixed aperture is f/11. You can't do anything about that. If you add a teleconverter to the lens you still end up with a fixed aperture, but it's adjusted to the teleconverter you have attached. If you attach the 2x teleconverter, your fixed aperture becomes f/22. And if you attach a 1.4x teleconverter, your fixed aperture becomes f/16. Now let's see at how the RF 100-500 lens looks with a 2x teleconverter attached. It's softer than I had hoped. And this isn't surprising. The softness is the reason I no longer use it with the RF 800mm lens. It's disappointing that the 2x teleconverter has this issue, especially for the amount of money you pay for it. So I probably won't use this combination on the Yellowstone trip. More likely I will use the 1.4x teleconverter on the RF 100-500 lens if I need a bit more reach. Either way, you can't install the teleconverter on the RF 100-500 lens unless you first zoom out to a minimum of 300mm. This then makes it more difficult to fit in a standard carry bag. Now let's look at the RF 800 lens with the 1.4x teleconverter attached. This image is very sharp compared to the results of the 2x teleconverter. Not sure how Canon managed to make this teleconverter so perfect, and the 2x teleconverter so flawed. But I've heard from other shooters that this doesn't appear to be exclusive to Canon. Other makes of teleconverters experience similar softness on the 2x versus the 1.4x. So I'm exporting these 4 images so we can do some full screen comparisons. Here are all 4 images in the following order. First up is the RF 100-500 without a teleconverter. Second is the RF 800 without a teleconverter. Third is the RF 100-500 with the 2x teleconverter. And last is the RF 800 with the 1.4x teleconverter. And now the 100% crop of each of these images. First, the RF 100-500 lens with no teleconverter. Second, the RF 800 lens with no teleconverter. Third, the RF 100-500 lens with the 2x teleconverter. And lastly, the RF 800 lens with the 1.4x teleconverter. I'm going to include links to all 4 raw files in the description below that you can review for yourselves. And finally, here's an image of all 4 scenarios at 100% zoom. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please click on like. And if you didn't enjoy this video, please click on like anyway. Happy shooting.